Morning, everyone. Did you hear the big news about Mr. Potato Head? Breaking, after 70 years, toy manufacturers Hasbro have announced they will be making Mr. Potato Head a gender-neutral toy. Mrs. Potato Head is said to be distraught and not available for comment. I mean, toy humor is kind of funny, right? And it's quite the reflection on the world. It's a potato, right? It's a potato. I mean, come on, really, right? So this is interesting. It seems like just a way to make money, a way to get in the news, some free advertising. Let's make it Potato Head, right? Is this eliminating women? Right? Is the default Mr. Potato Head? Can you buy a Mr. Potato Head pack, or does the Potato Head pack come with like Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head parts? Right? Do you have to buy two to get all of the parts? The other part of this is Toy Story, right? Potato Head and Mrs. Potato Head are characters in Toy Story. So I guess Toy Story 6 will focus on Potato Head's journey, the misgendering of Mr. Potato Head. The misgendering of Potato Head. There we go. I came out of the bathroom yesterday and I said, I think I'm going to have to talk about this on my show tomorrow. The misgendering of Potato Head. Anyway, moving into international news, as if Potato Head is headline news over this, but this is U.S. news, so here we go. The airstrike was the first military action undertaken by the Biden administration. So there was airstrikes in Syria yesterday. Back to normal, eh? Feels like the 90s again, doesn't it? Bombs flying in the Middle East and all sorts of fights over oil pipelines and access. That had stopped under Trump, but you wouldn't have known that, right? Or that did stop under Trump, but you wouldn't have known that. And it's very interesting, the situation. Here's Joe Biden's tweet from the past coming back to haunt him, 2019. He says, Trump's erratic, impulsive actions are the last thing we need as commander-in-chief. No president should order a military strike without fully understanding the consequences. We don't need another war in the Middle East, but Trump's actions toward Iran only make that more likely. Iran's claiming casualties in this, and they're saying that they're going to be upset and blah, 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 blah. Here is City News reporting. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will visit virtually with Trudeau and Garneau as part of the Biden administration's post-Trump fence-mending campaign. Ah, yes, the fence-mending campaign that includes missiles fired in the Middle East, right? Bomb Syria. And let's mend some fences. You know, that Trump guy was pretty bad. Pretty bad. Do you think Trump would have consulted with Pence as well? I'm not sure. We'll see in just a second about that. But Jen Psaki, I think that's probably wrong. She is currently Joe Biden's press secretary. And she says, what is the legal authority for airstrikes? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country. This is from 2017. This is when Trump there was an issue and they were goading. There was an international issue and it ended up fine, but there was talk of bombing Syria for ISIS, I think. Regardless, moving on, I think that's interesting. And I say again, would Trump have asked his vice president about bombing places like Syria? Do you think? Kamala Harris was not informed apparently prior to the Syrian bombing and is very upset about being left out of the loop. Per White House official, so unnamed official, could be made up news, but very interesting stuff, right? Like, oh, if only Joe Biden is the president, everything will be better. Joe Biden becomes the president, and we immediately lose thousands of jobs because Keystone's mothballed, right? And we start striking military targets in the Middle East again, yay! And by we, I mean like the West, right? Like it's. I think Canada's kind of seen as complicit, although I think at this point in time we might be seen as a province of China or a de facto province of China or something. I don't know that we're necessarily seen as the U.S.'s little brother anymore, right? So anyway, here is. I got distracted by the Potato Head stuff, so I got lost. Now let's get into some Canadian politics. Here is an update on our virtual House of Commons. I still think this is a bad idea because it throws our traditions, etc., out the window. And has there been any reasoning for why we shut down in 2020 anyway? Why we shut down the Parliament, prorogued the Parliament during all those investigations in 2020? Has there been any kind of investigation? Was the pandemic a big enough deal to warrant that? Right? I don't know. But speakers announced the House leaders now agree to the remote voting system for the House of Commons is ready, so it will start being used when the House comes back in March. This means the House will be able to vote in a few minutes instead of hours. The Zoom votes were taking about an hour per vote. In the before times, a vote in the House of Commons would take 15 minutes, maybe less. So we're getting back to maybe a more efficient system. I still don't like it. I don't like changing the rules on the fly because the pandemic forces us to. I think maybe 100 years of tradition, 100 years of medical, the way we deal with a medical crisis being thrown out the window to change, to fundamentally change our government and change how we deal with a medical crisis. Now we're dealing with it via modeling. Now we're dealing with it via de facto dictators in the public health office. I don't think that's better. Anyway, the House of Commons is going to be moving faster, it seems, in March. Holly Doan says, I reported about this yesterday. Apparently there's more documents on this, and that's on Holly Doan's channel, so you can check that out. Blacklock's reporter, you have to get a subscription for that. Auditor General defends sole-sourced contracts to lobbyists. Access to information documents show confidential copies of audits were fed to lobbyists months before available to MPs and senators. So they're getting inside information beforehand. So that's interesting, isn't it? More House of Commons stuff. Feds never were on track to fix First Nations drinking water, says Auditor General. Communities will never have reliable drinking water until deficiencies with water systems are addressed. So basically, continuing to do what we're continuing to do. There's been 60, there's been between 50 and 60 boil advisories for a very long time. And it doesn't seem to really make much of a difference. So it's funny that the Liberals continue to try and make political hay with infrastructure spending. And, there was a story today, I scrubbed it because Catherine McKenna, but it was infrastructure, and she was saying the infrastructure bank is going to get projects built, and they haven't built any projects in 4 years. They haven't got anything done in 4 years. They haven't done anything in 4 years. It's like talking about starting a YouTube show and then never starting the YouTube show, but you talk about it a lot. We're definitely going to get it done this week, next week, right? Or starting that diet, right? I'm going to definitely start tomorrow, right? And it is what it is. It's human nature. But when it's your leadership saying that, we're gonna fix this problem, and they never do, it leads you to believe that they're not competent, right? Or they're lying, one or the other. Jagmeet Singh says Justin Trudeau just voted no to pharmacare. Liberals just choose big pharma over Canadians again. They broke a promise for the 24th consecutive year. First time, shame on me. Second time, shame on you. Third time, shame on me. Oh my God, 24th time breaking a promise. Jagmeet Singh, have you learned nothing? Don't you watch politics? Don't you see what gets done in the House of Commons on our behalf? It's incredible, right? Millions can't afford their medications, and we can help them, but the Liberals blocked it. I'm appalled. Pharmacare could uplift so many Canadians right now. Your stories matter, so do your experiences. If you'd like to share them with my team and let's connect. Healthcare is a provincial thing. Healthcare, like the health of Canadians, the medical officer of health is in charge of things like the Canadian Food Guide and guiding good health recommendations for Canadians, usually. And locking us down completely and totally within our homes for months on end with no criteria in sight to actually measure success. Who needs that, right? That's crazy. That's what our medical officers of health do now. But it used to be that they would just do that at the federal level. Now Jagmeet Singh wants to get it into service. Now Jagmeet Singh wants to bring the federal government's power to delivering healthcare directly to the people, which is not the role of the federal government. So he should know that too, because he's a leader of a leader of a federal party, right? Right. I mean, a broke federal party that is backbenching the Liberals, backbenching the Liberals. They don't get to go into the caucus room, right? They get to have their own separate caucus room. But when the Liberals vote, it's implied that the NDP are going to vote with them, because otherwise they're powerless, right? Otherwise they're completely powerless. Anyway, regardless. How much did the NDP pharmacare bill commit to spend on pharmacare? Answer, big goose egg. That should tell you what you need to know about their efforts to mislead, says Liberal MP Andy Filmer. I don't know. I didn't look into the bill. I don't trust a pharmacare bill. I don't think that it's appropriate for the federal government to table that. I think that it's notable that the Conservatives are running ads like, "Hey, let's get to know Erin O'Toole," and the NDP are running campaign-style electioneering promises when really we have massive issues with charter violations that these liberals are turning a blind eye to. We've got religious persecution. We've got a pastor in jail because he's refusing to turn his congregants away. We've got medical officers of health who are literally growing tiny little mustaches, right? Like they're getting the padded shoulders and they're getting medals, like, and they're just giving themselves the medals. I'm joking about the medals, but I'm pretty sure the mustache thing is true. And so making themselves into little dictators. And the problem is nobody's addressing it. Nobody's addressing it. Here's Aaron O'Toole. This is a very good sign, and so is the number of likes and comments, okay, that Aaron O'Toole is not very well known or very well liked. There's not a lot of people who are interested in him or what he's talking about. Why? Because he's not talking about the things that matter. Why? Because he's staying really far away from the lockdowns, the charter violations, the fact that there's absolutely no metrics to back up this COVID-19 thing. In fact, he wanted to use the War Measures Act, right? He was saying, we've got to get this, nip it in the bud, lock these people down now, right? That's what he was pushing Trudeau for back in March, April of last year. But regardless of all of that, here's Aaron O'Toole's little 30-second ad. I'm just going to show you the first, until it makes sense. I'll show you the first 15 seconds. If it continues to make sense, I'll show more. But just watch. This is an ad, an introduction ad. This is, you don't know me, and I'm trying to fix that problem, right? And he doesn't show his face until after. Like, it's his back. It's weird. Anyway, carry on.
Do you know who this is? Probably not.
No, because we couldn't see him. He's completely in shadow. You can't see his face. Okay, moving on.
He's no celebrity, just an ordinary Canadian who served his country. Just a husband and father who stood up for workers, who works hard, with years of experience in business. Just someone who's in it for Canada, not for headlines. Just Aaron.
I maybe would have gone Aaron O'Toole. Nice to meet you. I'm Aaron. Anyway, regardless, it's weak and it's got a weak response. And what are you going to do? What do you do? Speaking of weak and a weak response, House of Commons staffer says those responsible for undermining democracy and violating human rights must be held accountable. And then also that's Mark Garneau. And then also Mark Garneau, I abstain. And here's 10 seconds of two clips highlighting the flip-flop nature of the leadership in this country. Here we go.
Those responsible for undermining democracy and for violating human rights must be held accountable.
I abstain on behalf of the Government of Canada.
Yeah, right. Strong leadership, right? Decisive leadership. And then a day later, he says, I'm pleased to join a meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism earlier today to discuss the importance of human rights and artificial intelligence. Again, I was saying the other day that it is Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau are the last two people running governments that I would trust to run our economy, right? To reboot our economy. I barely trust them. I don't trust them to run it. I think they're running it poorly. They're spending too much. They're not taking into account where the money is going to come from eventually, right? And they're not taking into account the fact that the borrowing rate's not going to remain at zero forever. But regardless, so I think they're doing it poorly. And this person, Mark Garneau, the person who is the lackey sent by the government cabinet to say we abstain, he's not strong in his convictions or positions. He's playing politics, trying to skate on that center aisle. We're not going to really commit to it because we've got a lot riding on this, but if the government wants to commit to it, we won't stand in the way. I don't want that person representing us in a meeting for an alliance for multilateralism to discuss human rights and AI. Like, no, sorry, I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust the people who are aiding you if the choices that you made were these two. And they are, right? They are. So that's the government's stance. That's the stance of him. He's willing to play ball. He's willing to be the face of the guy who says, we'll abstain. We're not gonna weigh in on that, even though we're the most important people in Canada to weigh in on that. We're not going to, right? He's got all of that, and he's just not going to weigh in on it. So Rosemary Barton is going to hold our government accountable. She is going to interview the U.S. Secretary of State, Abe Lincoln. I thought that was funny. This Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live. Yeah, Abe Lincoln, Anthony Blinken. Anyway, I think that's funny. Yeah. This is why the Canadian press is kind of a joke, right? Like, yeah, we've got lots going on. So you abstained, and now you're going to be going and talking about human rights as they relate to AI. But you can't talk about human rights as they relate to Uyghurs in China. Could you elaborate? How are you a good representative if you can't do one but are advocating in the other instance? No, we'll just talk about how great Joe Biden is, and this is the apology tour. This is the bridge building tour, right? We're not serious, and we didn't get bombed, right? Party time. Right? How it started. Moving into back to Canada, I suppose. Kind of, we were in Canada, now we're back to Canada. How it started. Prime Minister health officials warned Canadians against believing COVID-19 internment camps disinformation. This is CBC News from October 20th. Do you remember those innocent days when we were being told, no, you're crazy, when we were being gaslit about the building of the internment camps? And now, fast forward to today, or yesterday, this is jumping up on me. Federal Conservative MPs call for suspension of mandatory hotel quarantines following sexual assault. So they're not calling them internment camps. They're saying mandatory hotel quarantines, hotel jails, right? Because of a sexual assault. The alleged assault took place on a floor where air travelers were ordered into mandatory quarantine pending the results of their COVID test. So it's wild, okay? The Trudeau government is completely and thoroughly, excessively incompetent. They can't even get unconstitutional Nazi-like imprisonment correct. Huh? Little mustache. Federal Conservatives call for suspension of hotel quarantine policy following reports of sexual assault. I'll tell you what happened. It's just so wild. It's so wild. A quarantine screening officer who allegedly demanded cash from a woman before sexually assaulting her at her home faces related charges, police say on Wednesday. The accused had been trained by Public Health Agency of Canada, PHAC, as a designated screening officer under the Quarantine Act, Halton Regional Police said. According to a police statement, the accused was doing a quarantine compliance check at a home in Oakville, Ontario on February 18th. The accused informed the victim that they were in violation of the quarantine order and demanded that a fine be paid in cash, police alleged. When the victim declined to pay, she was sexually assaulted by the accused. Police say they arrested the man they identified only as Hement, 27, of Hamilton, on Tuesday. He has been charged with sexual assault and extortion. The Public Health Agency of Canada said it was very disturbed by the alleged events and was cooperating with investigators. Police refused to disclose the name of the security company that employs the man, but said he had been suspended. The Public Health Agency said that it awarded contracts last month to 4 companies to conduct in-person compliance visits. This is going to go well. I mean, it's very, very disturbing what's happening, just without the sexual assault and the extortion, right? Add the sexual assault and extortion, and we're living through history. But nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Everybody seems to be pretty on board with the whole, we're going to lock everyone down until they're compliant, and that guy who got attacked at Canadian Tire should have been wearing a mask. It's a very odd thing to see. And I'm not saying I think that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that there are people out there having that kind of conversation. Like, oh, why wasn't he just complying? And it's like, nope. We've turned the corner now. People are getting it wrong. And that's being encouraged by media. That's being encouraged by the groupthink, right? And if you don't think that, then you get the angry normie stare, right? Like the angry NPC character. That's what I'm thinking of in my head. The angry NPC guy. And it's a real look. Like when the news overtakes somebody, when you're talking to somebody about something, and then you start hearing the news being parroted or coming out of their mouth, and it's like, whoa, we're all done, because anything I say now is going to buy into the theory that the preloaded news-fed responses were, and it's incredible to watch the NPC take over, like the Matrix with the cop guy, the Smith, and he jumps into somebody. It's just like that. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, regardless, back to this. Here's what we know. Moving into Alberta and employment. Unbelievable. Here's what we know so far. 15,000 Albertans are getting fired. Colleges and universities are getting a 14% cut. A dark day in Alberta. We are all paying for Jason Kenney's mistakes. I fear there's going to be a fracture. I think it's already happened. There's going to be a fracture in the Conservative Party in Alberta. I don't know if Notley's going to get back in. I don't think she's that popular, but she's well organized. But this is not going to go well. Doug Ford tried to stop this having to do cuts like this. And now we're so far past all of that being not a conversation in Ontario. But Doug Ford was going to try and grow into the spending the Liberals made in Ontario. Basically, that was his plan. Like, we're gonna just kind of keep it steady until the economy grows to support that part, and then we'll carry forward and grow through it. That was the plan, kind of, sort of, right? And now here we are a few years later, and one pandemic later, and one unchecked spending spree, right? A weekend bender, and you wake up and you say, what was the bill? Right? And then you look over and you see Dr. Tam and you go, what happened? The worst version of the hangover ever. Ottawa bars already devastated by pandemic, hit with skyrocketing insurance. There was a Legion or a community hall that had been purchased by literally community members had like pooled money together, fundraised, and bought this community hall. And now they can't run it because the insurance is too expensive. This happened like 6 months ago. Now we're getting to the point where insurance for just a regular like bar or restaurant is too high. I think because of COVID. But what does this do? It drives the price of the properties down, right? To get scooped up. I mean, Main Street is being absolutely decimated. Who's being enriched at this point in time? Not Main Street, right? The corporate global elites who can continue to operate their stores with impunity, with the government driving more customers because of necessity. You can't make a different choice. You have to go to these big box stores. And I don't think that they should be limited in what they can sell. That's not my point here. My point is, it's very interesting that we're having Main Street hollowed out, and then instead of having a situation where everybody understands and giving breaks, it's like, oh yeah, and your insurance is doubled this year. Sorry about that. And there's an increased fee because you're a risky business. You sell alcohol, right? And everybody knows people don't physically distance with alcohol. And it's like, okay, what data do you have for that? None, but you're going to pay twice the insurance. Dan Kelly says, thanks to Toronto Mayor John Tory and Medical Officer Dr. E.P. Davila for meeting with CFIB today and listening to the concerns of Toronto's small business owners. CFIB asked many questions and shared our ideas on how we can safely move the city region out of lockdown. This is a year in, almost a year in. We went into lockdown on March 17. It took them almost a year to meet with this representative for small businesses? Really? And Dan Kelly's saying, thank you so much. I mean, I get being gracious and I get playing politics, but holy cow, a year in? Thank you so much for spending the time. They spend days and days and days inflating and fear-mongering case numbers on the television. They could spend 10 minutes and talk to you. Although had they, I fear we would have seen the big box stores limited in what they could sell, because Dan Kelly was actively promoting fairness by limiting what big box stores could sell to somehow even the playing field with small businesses. I'm not sure how exactly, because the small businesses wouldn't have been able to open. The Tow Truck Cartel I've been telling you about for years. Remember in 2018 when we found out that they had stolen the radios and cloned the radios? Well, the justice moves slowly, and now there's a fourth OPP officer charged in the towing corruption probe. All you've got to do is give us a radio, man, and not report it stolen for 24 hours. You'll get the radio back, and nobody will know, right? Except when people know. And then, you might get in a bit of trouble, right? You might lose your job. Yikes. Not so good, right? Not so good. I don't know if that was the case or if he was participating more than that or whatever, but it's not so good, man. Not so good. In fact, there's people can think that they're doing good, like, police owned car company and police owned car rental company, police connected tow truck company, what could be safer than that, right? But the reality is, look at what happened with this, right? The quarantined officer allegedly demanded cash and then sexually assaulted an Ontario woman. Power corrupts. And the problem is, when you are in charge of all of it, right? What if somebody rubs you the wrong way and you don't like him, right? And he says, F you, jerk. And then you say, yeah, double the rate for that guy, right? Now is it a good thing, right? It's such a slippery slope that the free market should, and you shouldn't be using your police powers for anything like that. That's just crazy. Anyway, here's a wild one. Babies are not exempt from mask bylaw at some regional businesses. Boycott Chicopee. So here's Guelph Today saying babies not exempt from mask bylaw at some regional businesses. You can't do that. You can't say You can't do that. And the illustration of why you can't do that is later on in my show. Hold on. I'll just move the segment up. Okay, so here's Randy Hillier, and he says, in Ontario, much of Canada, we do not serve the disabled or those with health problems. Masking is the new means of segregation. Ford Nation, Ontario, laws and orders can be unjust. Stand up and defend freedoms and justice. Here is Chelsea Smith, and she's illustrating the problem with this. She's got a sign that says, we serve whites only, no Spanish, and no Mexicans. And she says, F your charter rights, private property, I make the rules, protected status can get gone. And the problem with that is obvious. You can't pick and choose your customers based on skin color. You're not allowed to do that. But now people are saying, if you don't wear a mask, regardless of your health status, regardless of what that means to your health, you can't enter my business. You're not allowed to enter the business. And they're saying, we'll serve you in other ways, right? We'll do the curb pickup and blah, 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 all this stuff. Just don't come in here with a mask. But the problem is that's not the same. Costco, for example, if you try and buy veggie straws at Costco, you have to buy 75 veggie straws to get them for the same price as they are at Costco on the shelf. So I have to buy 75 bags, and the bags are huge, right? And I have to pay a $3 delivery charge as well for the veggie straws because they're I don't know, they're breakable, I guess. And so regardless, that's not fair. That's discriminating against me because I can't wear the demanded mask, right? Or because my health demands that I not wear that mask, right? I say again, there's 3 holes that intake air into my lungs, and if I cover them up, that's not healthy for me. And I'm allowed to make that decision. And they're not allowed to say, if you don't follow this rule, that's not a law, you can't use our store. But they've got people. Listen, if you walk into an LCBO and you fill your pants full of vodka bottles, they'll let you walk out. But if you walk into an LCBO without a mask on, they'll attack you maybe, right? If you do it to a Canadian Tire, if you walk into a Canadian Tire and you don't have a mask on, I saw a video of this yesterday, I think I showed it. There was the guy who got attacked and choked out. I don't know if he was choked out. He was put into a headlock and somebody was putting a choking move on him, which is absolutely not what you do. If you're trained as a security guard, you're not supposed to put somebody in a headlock. That is absolutely not okay. But why is that okay? Why is that socially acceptable? Why were there 10 or 12 people walking around? If I was there with my wife and or children, I would get the kids into the car and I would stop those people. I would intervene. And I realized that that's probably the wrong move from a legal standpoint, right? But that's the right move from a human standpoint. You stop people from attacking somebody else. And you never know. The world's a crazy place. You don't know what's happening or who's got what, right? And it's a scary situation. But having 3 guys overpower another guy like that because he wasn't wearing a mask, we've fallen a far way. Here's Catherine McKenna, and she is commenting on this. This is appalling. It's unacceptable that we continue to hear about attacks targeting Muslim women. We will stand against Islamophobia, discrimination, and hatred of all kinds. But they won't, though. This is a dog whistle. This is focusing on one and not the other, right? And so it says, please read my statement on the attack that took place at the Century Park Transit Station on February 17th against a black Muslim woman wearing a hijab. So, and this is a trend for this government. They'll focus on one type of discrimination and say it's abhorrent, but another type of discrimination won't get a mention at all. Very interesting. And so the reason we were talking about masks initially as well was to move into this. Quebec is now mandating masks after March break. That's interesting. There's no, in my opinion, like I've written them letters, and I will be addressing the health board, the Board of Health in my local unit on March 3rd, asking about what studies have been done on prolonged masking of children, and all sorts of questions. I think I've got my angle sorted out with my I get 5 minutes to speak, but it doesn't look like they're wanting to let up on masking. Yesterday I showed that they want to even wind down the face shield as being good enough, right? And no, not going to happen. I asked them where were the studies that says the face shield isn't as good as a mask? Where's the study that says the mask is good enough to stop transmission of a respiratory virus? All of the peer-reviewed studies and clinical trials show that wearing masks increases infection rate. Anyway, regardless, because you mess with it, right? And especially the cloth masks, they increase the infection rate as well. So Quebec's primary students will be required to wear a mask after March break. That's terrible. Here's Dr. Gill. And she says, British Medical Journal, children have least to gain and most to lose from school closures, this pandemic has seen an unprecedented intergenerational transfer of harm and cost from elderly socioeconomic privileged people to disadvantaged children. Many pupils may never be able to catch up, vulnerable, falling through gaps in school and social care systems. No substitute for face-to-face learning. Precautionary principle: keep schools open to prevent catastrophic harms. Government must protect rights of kids. Ameliorate other harms means make less other harms, or make less as well as you can. And here's the actual study. I think that it was interesting. This is UK, but it applies to our kids too, right? This is BMJ that holds this content. Some 8.8 million school children in the UK have experienced severe disruption to their education, with prolonged school closures and national exams canceled for 2 consecutive years. School closures have been implemented internationally with insufficient evidence for their role in minimizing COVID-19 transmission and insufficient consideration of the harms to children. For some children, education is the only way out of poverty. For others, school offers a safe haven away from a dangerous or chaotic home life. Learning loss, reduced social interaction, isolation, reduced physical activity, increased mental health problems, and potential for increased abuse, exploitation, and neglect have all been associated with school closures. Reduced future income and life expectancy are associated with less education. Children with special education needs or who are already disadvantaged are at increased risk of harm. So we're hurting our kids, and we know we're hurting our kids, and they don't seem to care. Here's an Ontario doctor. I think he means well. I was disappointed with, he had a little conference with some doctors, and they were worried about not the correct things. They were doing the same distractionary crap that everybody else was doing. Not Dr. Gill. Their interaction was good, but his wasn't. I didn't like it. But anyway, he put together this thread. He said there's a lot of chatter about the safety of schools opening. Here's a thread on why I think it's safe. Decreasing COVID-19 cases despite schools being open throughout the country. Schools have not been the primary source of outbreaks from COVID-19. And then he gives the data from the Ontario COVID-19 dashboard. Children, specifically those under 10, do not seem to be a major vector of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 transmission. And also, there's 2 reports that back that up. Children are extremely unlikely to die from COVID-19. Teachers, as per this study, weren't at a higher risk. Economic impact of school closures is significant. When comparing school closures versus keeping them open, no change in the spread as per West Germany study. Increased child abuse during closures, higher rates of eating disorders. Anecdotally, kids are suffering to the point a child psychologist, colleague, teachers, and SWs urged me to put this on. And this is one of the conferences I was talking about. Ultimately, I feel school should be an essential service. I want to commend our teachers for the amazing work they've been doing to keep our kids safe. We need you more than ever. The last thing, in YOW, prior to the latest lockdown, our schools were doing fine. No reason to think this won't continue with low community spread, including in vaccinations and better access to testing. Thanks, everyone. So there's a lot of evidence that we should be keeping our schools open, and that's not exactly what's happening. Here's the health. This is Henry. I think this is Bonnie Henry. And I don't know if it's Bonnie. But Ezra says, BC's unelected, unaccountable public health bureaucrat who's destroyed countless jobs and devastated countless lives said it's unacceptable that citizens protest outside of her office and that some media criticize her. Here she's talking about how it impacts her family. I just want you to understand what these people think and how far out of touch they are, because they are out of touch. Here we go.
This is one of the things that has been incredibly challenging. We have people who have been protesting outside our office, and it affects me, but it also affects my family. It affects the people we work with, and that's the part that I find hardest to deal with. We have a very strong support system, and I know my colleagues across the country have all been facing some similar challenges. We meet regularly, and we do support each other in that. And
I think that fundamentally, if we don't have a way to, we being the public, don't have a way to hold unelected bureaucrats accountable. And so the only way we know how to hold people accountable is our charter right to protest. And so to tell you that we don't like what you're doing, that's what we do. And you say, oh, well, you have to take this medicine. But the thing is, you're not proving it very well. That's the problem. So if you're not proving it very well and people continue to protest and you don't like it, change what you're doing. It's pretty simple. If active COVID-19 patients, this is long-term care stuff. Governor Cuomo is being 9,000 patients sent into New York nursing homes. And they're saying that Governor Cuomo might be responsible for the deaths if they should have reasonably known not to do that. And that seems to be the kind of standard for what Ontario and Alberta and some places in Quebec are doing. I was reporting about this before. Red zones were being set up in retirement homes, and nobody seemed to care. I guess people are starting to care. National Telegraph is reporting. We've emailed Jason Kenney's office, Tyler Shando, and members of his staff, as well as AHS, Alberta Health Services, for our investigation into COVID-positive patients being transferred from hospitals to care homes. So far, we've only received back obfuscation. So they're not answering questions. They're just trying to shut up the questions, right? Stop the questioning. And Paul Mitchell says, if active COVID-19 patients were transferred by AHS into care homes and the Alberta government knew about this, is this not a huge legal problem? Did seniors die as a result? Hiding the problem will not make it go away. I agree. And here's the National Telegraph talking about them emailing Jason Kenney's office, etc. Alberta government transferred COVID-positive patients to care homes, right? Here's the Telegraph allegation. Alberta transferring COVID-positive patients into care homes. So very interesting that we're in a situation similar to New York with Governor Cuomo. And very interesting that it's taken this long, right? Nobody seems to, not that nobody seems to care, but the urgency seems to be only on vaccines or only on listening to whatever the media says instead of using your common sense and actually focusing on solving the problem in the first place. They had a COVID press conference, as they usually do. Doug Ford and the medical officer of health, not Williams, Davila maybe. Anyway, Ontario, and even Tam. No, not Tam. Maybe Williams was there. Anyway, Ontario, Anthony Furey saying, Ontario has significantly downgraded their virus projections. Today's chart showed a worst case scenario of 4,000 per day. That soon tapers off. And as we know, their worst case scenario has never come close to happening, which is true. Here's a letter to a thoughtful letter from Kevin and Garth Arsenault to the Chief Health Officer of PEI, Dr. Heather Morrison. I think there's a lot of really good points in this letter. I'm only going to highlight a couple of them, but the first one is, the question is PEI now following the WHO's recommendation to only declare a COVID-19 case on asymptomatic people who have at least 2 positive PCR tests? That's a viable, good question. And it goes through with good logic and reasoning, and then hits with a good question at the end of each number. Hold on. The second point here is basically asking about the cycle threshold and saying, this is what the WHO says. What are we still using this high cycle threshold rate? And again, these are valid, viable questions that really should deserve answers. Questions 3 and 4 ask about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, citing research and studies that they work. There's good efficacy there. Number 5 asks, can you provide scientific proof that non-medical face coverings prevent the spread of SARS-CoV-2 and that the use of these masks don't harm people either physically or emotionally? They can't prove that because they do harm people emotionally. Have you noticed people averting their eyes from each other now? They're averting their eyes from people's faces because they know there's no signals there. They know they can't see anything. There's no reciprocation. There's no reciprocality. That's not the right word. Reciprocation. But there's no give and take. And because there's no give and take, there's no point in looking at you. You see? You can't get it from the eyes. How often do you look at somebody's eyes? Often people will look at a nose or a forehead, right? Because looking at somebody's eyes is intimate, right? You look away, right? But you look at their face and they look at yours. And you don't see it because you're looking at their face. You don't see a lot, right? You exclude a lot in order to focus. But regardless, having your face covered is like cutting the cat's off of whiskers, the whiskers off a cat, right? Or the tail off of a mouse, right? Because it cripples you. Because your information gathering ability is crippled, giving and receiving. You can't give the information that you usually would give in non-verbally, right? Muscularly, involuntarily, right? If you're angry or upset, people can read your face. If you're happy, people can read your face. If your face is covered, they can't. So they stopped looking at you. You stopped looking at them. Okay, back to this. It is damaging emotionally. Just from a developmental and from an emotional and behavioral standpoint, the masks are boring, dehumanizing. So sad. I can't underscore this enough. Anyway, what is your scientific justification for continuing to force the state of a medical emergency on PEI? Great question. Have you or your team performed detailed risk versus benefit analysis on the effects of locking down PEIs compared to the harms caused by COVID-19? Where is the risk assessment? Will you commit to following the ethical guidelines of informed consent for every islander before they receive the experimental gene therapy that is not a vaccine? Can you explain the scientific justification for encouraging islanders to get an experimental gene therapy for COVID-19 when you know that vaccinated people can still acquire and spread the disease and they still will be subject to the same lockdowns and restrictions as non-vaccinated people? And you will make the vaccination mandatory for will you make the vaccination mandatory for islanders under any circumstances? Our final question to you, Dr. Morrison, is will you become a signatory to the Great Barrington Declaration? Checkmate. Spoiler alert, no, she won't. And the reason she won't is because she either believes it or she's paid off. And the unfortunate truth here is I think we need an entire cleaning of like most public officials down to the medical officers of health for a lot of jurisdictions across a lot of places. I think we're in a lot of trouble. And I don't think that they're having any plans to listen to these reasonable questions, answer these reasonable questions. And I don't think that they're in any hurry to unlock us, because there are a lot of people who are clamoring for safety, and they're being told that safety is just a stay locked in your house away, right? Which is terrible. Forget the Great Resets. Ontario has a smarter plan for restarting its post-COVID economy. They're giving free education for people to take PSW school, basically, to deal with the low number of PSWs, which, okay, that's a reasonable amount, or that's a reasonable plan, I suppose, except that you can't start growing the economy until you've kind of fixed the problem. You can't grow the economy in an emergency. So if they're trying to kickstart the economy and fix the problem and all of this other stuff, great. Can we get on with life? Can we fix the emergency, stop the emergency declaration, get back to normal? And the answer is like they're trying to make this normal now. This is supposed to be normal. We're supposed to stop complaining soon. The complaints are going to get louder and longer, and people are not going to be able to ignore it, I think. Here is Nick Feligno. Oh, I hope I don't have that wrong. I probably got it wrong. I'm sorry, Nick. He says, get these kids playing hockey. And there's a lot of people who are upset. Big letter expressing the feelings of many players in the OHL, signed by 146 players in 24 hours. They're sharing it to the media. The media, I doubt, will pick it up. We would like to encourage everyone now to retweet and sign on our petition and get the message out. Yeah, we need to open up. This state of emergency is not appropriate. Not anymore. Ryan O'Connor says, hope more NHLers speak up and tell Ontario health officials that if they can play hockey safely, then so can the kids. Yeah, we have to take care of these people. We have to take care of our kids. We have to encourage them and tell them that there is a future. It's not pointless. It's not hopeless. The world will return to normal. We will see light again. It's not going to always be like this. And we need to have leadership share that and send that message. And they're not. A civil liberties lawyer says a decision by the City of Toronto to bill a restaurant owner nearly $200,000 to cover the cost of enforcing lockdown regulations raises concerns about people's constitutionality protected right to protest. Yeah, if you are allowed to protest, that means you don't get a fine for protesting, right? You're putting people in danger. Yeah, not so much. Not so much. Oxford University says research not affected after expert flags COVID lab hack. Ah, yes. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Nothing happened. Just this tiny hack here. Carry on, citizen. Nothing to see here, right? Like at the Leslie Nielsen clip. Nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. So Patty Haydu says the borders are not going to be open anytime soon. But the borders haven't been closed. That's the problem. They've been closed to Canadians. You can fly out and in, kind of, and now it's going to cost you $2,000 if you want to come home with a COVID hotel stay, right? But Patty Haydu says these border measures are in place to protect Canadians, then they will remain in place until such time that science and evidence indicates that it is safe to release them. When Patty Haydu is using the words science and evidence, run. Can we see the science you use, Patty Haydu? The medical metrics of quarantine? Yes, please. Let's see it. I'm very interested. But Justin Trudeau, despite the borders being closed, they're on target to hit their immigration targets, right? Despite Canada's borders being closed, the country saw a record number of newcomers in January. With 1 million unemployed Canadians, Trudeau wants to bring in another 1 million newcomers. And I don't see... People said in my comments yesterday, I'm seeing lots of enthusiasm for the PPC. Okay, maybe. I don't know I had my hand pretty firmly on the pulse in the run up to the 2019 election, and it felt like people really wanted change. It felt like there was a lot of conversations going on. It felt like it was about 50-50, the trolls versus the non-trolls on Twitter. And I mean, Twitter is not real life. Like, Twitter is very much in its own little bubble. But it is somewhat reflective of real life sometimes. And it just seemed like there was a lot more excitement back then than there is now. And back then we didn't do very well. And so it's hard to square all of that enthusiasm. I think that people will just check out and not vote for Erin O'Toole because Erin O'Toole's a very poor leader. And instead of going out and voting for a new party that is being decimated in the press and name called and all that other stuff, I don't think it matters so much about the name calling, except that it does matter, right? People listen. People are like, oh, that's the racist party. They poisoned the well, and they poisoned it really well. So it's hard for me to see. And maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm not looking in the right place. I want a viable option, and so far I'm not seeing it. And I'm not seeing the people flock to that option. I'm not seeing people pay attention to the people who are talking about it. In fact, I'm seeing people being silenced more and more that they talk about it. And so that tells me that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how really enthusiastic people are. And if people are enthusiastic and then they get smacked down, they don't they don't speak up again, right? If they're enthusiastic and they get encouraged, oh yeah, man, I heard about them too. They're great. Oh yeah, let's look at them. We'll talk about them again later, right? That breeds growth of the party. That breeds the ability to talk about them. That breeds the ability to have word of mouth and all that other stuff. That's how organizations grow. But if you hear every time you bring them up, bad, racist, blah blah blah, you stop bringing them up. Right? That's kind of what I'm talking about. We're not in a situation where it's easy to grow the party. We're not in a situation where people are excited about it. We're not even in a situation where people really even want to talk about politics. The politics they want to talk about are the vaccine politics, because that's being pushed. Speaking of the vaccine. So that's what I mean when I say I don't see the enthusiasm for the People's Party of Canada. And is there a full-throated we're against critical race theory? Is there a full-throated we're against lockdowns, period? Like, where's the anti-lockdown plank in the platform? Is that on the front page? Did I miss it? Where are the politicians talking against lockdowns, right? Where are the politicians talking against the loss of our civil liberties in a very coherent way? Maybe I'm missing it. Maybe I am. Possibly I am. Twitter's hiding lots, right? Who knows? Maybe I missed it. But there's lots going on, and it doesn't seem like anybody's talking about anything that is really related to the important conversations that need to be happening right now. That's the problem. My goodness, I'm so long today. Digital vaccination passports likely available before summer. This is in Germany. Everyone agrees that we need a digital vaccination certificate, Merkel told the press conference on Thursday. That's via Reuters, right? Discrimination and prejudice based on health status is abhorrent. Prejudices are what fools use for reason. That's Voltaire. Israel adopts the law allowing the naming of unvaccinated to be shared. Yes, you get to be shared. And then what they do with that information is they'll encourage you to get vaccinated. The local magistrate or the local person will have your name and where you live, and they'll come to your house and encourage you to get vaccinated. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll get this guy. Hermet? What was his name? Hermet? Maybe he'll show up. Hemet? Yeah. Hey man, you owe me a cash fine. This doesn't feel like a third world country at all. Vaccination passports may open society, says CP24, but inequity looms. Vaccination passports are against our charter rights. You can't do that. And they're going to try. They're definitely going to try. They're going to try as much as they're slaughtering this salmon farm. I watched a TED Talk in 2014 or something like that, talking about how farming the ocean was going to be the way we're going to feed the mass influx of population that we've got, and to get rid of world poverty, and you'll have your own 10 by 10 floating square of the ocean. And he had this thing, and he said eating wild fish will become boring. You won't like the taste of wild fish because it'll be so different. It'd be like eating. He made some comparison, like eating bison versus eating a cow or something like that. And he said farmed salmon, farmed tuna, farmed fish, and farmed ocean is the way of the future, and blah 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 blah, all this stuff. And he sounded very convincing. I thought, man, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. He was in the farm. He was in this BC industry that's being shut down. Why would they do this? Vancouver Island Fish Farm begins euthanizing 1 million salmon ahead of the federal regulations because they said they can't do this, right? They said they're not allowed to farm fish or something like that because of reasons, out of sustainable development, or they want to control the food or something. I'm not entirely sure exactly why. But I thought, man, like from this is the way of the future to no, actually you're going to eat crickets. So no farmed salmon for you. We're not going to do this sustainably. You get bugs. Thanks, Klaus Schwab. Please, could I have my bug ration? 2 women, one in their late 40s and the other in their late teens, were stabbed multiple times. Both are currently in the hospital in stable condition with non-life-threatening injuries. This is in Hamilton at a maple leaf plant. Now, I was talking earlier about why all of these outbreaks in maple leaf plants, and somebody said to me it's because of migrant workers, and they live in like basically dorms where they live multiple people to a room. And that immediately popped into mind when this story popped up. I don't know why. But I hope that, I mean, it's a very strange thing. It's very odd for Canadians to carry knives to work to stab their coworkers with, or like maybe was the knife there? It is a meat plant after all, so maybe there was a knife just sitting around and he took that and they were angry. I have no idea what the circumstances are around all of this, but it just seems like a departure from usual Canadian problem solving. You know, like, did they take it up with HR first, or did they just go right for the knife? Was it a machete or was it a knife? Okay, enough questions out of me. It just is, from the gun crime in Toronto and the lack of it being addressed in the House of Commons to the backhanded blaming of all Canadians for being racist. Okay, to having our culture basically ridiculed and told it's awful. And then stuff like this happens. I find it hard to square. I find it all hard to square. It's very ridiculous in my opinion. Oh, okay. One last show note, and then I'll leave it. I'll end the show. It's actually more work for me to do a little 1-minute teaser for YouTube. And the last 2 days I forgot, or I didn't forget. I accidentally uploaded the full video, and I think I'm just going to upload the full video until they give me another strike. And I've basically accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, diversify away from YouTube. So I've got BitChute kind of and Rumble now that I've began posting on, and a lot of my shows are backed up on Rumble instead of YouTube now. So I've solved that problem. So I guess I'm going to put it back on YouTube for a little while until they tell me that I've violated their terms of service and they get rid of me fully, completely, I suppose. So I just thought I'd let you know that that's it. 51 minutes in. Jeepers creepers, so long. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, check out SpeakingMoistly.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.